Do you remember the last time you were thinking, am I even ready for this? And then you told yourself, well, I'm as ready as I'm going to be. Well, I had one of those moments this morning as I was thinking about not just church today, but Aha Mokupuni with all the kids coming this afternoon at 3 and being in charge of all that. And then the worship service, since I'm the host pastor, I'm kind of in charge of that too. I mean, I've got some help, but it's really just making sure that all the details all come together. And it's been just a really full week. Many of you know that all of my siblings and their spouses were here. They just left yesterday. And this is the first time they all came all at once. And my niece was here too. And so I just thought, well, I've got to spend as much time with them as I can. And there's just been a few other things going on that I thought, okay, God, I know that prayer that, God never gives you more than you can handle, but I kind of felt it when I got the letter from the court saying that I have to put aside Monday through Friday of this week, at least for jury duty. And I was just thinking, so I've got to get ready for next Sunday last week? And I thought, it's just not going to happen. I prayed over the weekend, and guess what? There's no jury duty for me. But nevertheless, I kept thinking, I don't feel totally prepared, but I'm as ready as I'm going to be because today is here and the time is up and all the preparation's just going to have to come together. I'm going to have to trust the efforts and trust all that went into them. And not just on my part, but on the part of the people who have volunteered from this congregation and the island of the Association for the United Church of Christ. There's been so many people preparing for today. But, it was kind of neat just thinking, that's what our theme is today. Getting ready, getting prepared. And I kind of, in one of those natural preparers, I don't want you to start throwing things at me or anything like that, but I usually like to pack before a trip a couple days early and just get that over with so I don't have to be thinking about it at the last minute. And for my sermons, usually by Monday or Tuesday, I kind of have a feel for how it's all coming together, and I just like to prepare. But I'm also often asking myself, could I have done even better? And I was thinking this morning and yesterday and the day before, maybe I could have just planned for the youth event this afternoon a little better. Maybe planned a game that was a little more fun for the kids, or maybe I could have communicated with a few people a little better, and on and on and on. And as I was thinking of all my self-talk, it reminded me of the very end of the movie Schindler's List. Who's seen Schindler's List? It's probably 20 years old. Pretty much everybody, almost everybody here has seen Schindler's List. One of my all-time favorite movies. And for those of you that haven't seen it, Oskar Schindler is this business owner that is just determined to save as many Polish Jews as possible from extermination from the Nazis. And he made great sacrifices. He basically gave all of his wealth and put himself at great risk, his life at risk, and just poured himself into the life of the Jewish workers that he had working at his factory and any others that he could help. And he just poured himself out. But at the end of the movie, what was really interesting to me, and it's like, how once in a while you see a movie and there's a part of it that you just think, I'll never shake this part. It will just always stick with me. He was about to flee from the Soviets because the war was just about at an end and the Soviets were coming in, and he knew that he could be arrested and just for being who he was. And so he had a car, and all of his Jewish friends that he had saved and everybody else was wishing him well and preparing him to flee. And he stood there saying, I wish I could have done more. I wish I could have done more. And people are thinking, what do you mean? You've done more than anybody else. And he's looking at the car he's about to get in to escape. And I could have sold my car, and maybe I could have saved one more person. And there was some guilt, I could tell, that went along with that. But it really made me think, what else can we do to prepare for the important things in our lives? But also, when can we say, I'm as prepared as I'm going to be? I've done as much as I can, and now it's time to move on. So today's parable has to do with getting ready and being prepared. So I found myself very much drawn to this parable right away. It's an odd parable. It's towards the end of the Gospel of Matthew, and there's 3 parables left, and they all 3 have to do something with getting prepared and being ready. But the parable that Grace Eleanor read to us this morning is really just that. It's all about being prepared, getting ready. And I thought, oh gosh, I need to pay attention to this. So in this parable, there are 10 virgins. And of course, we tone it down in English and say bridesmaids, but basically, it's the same word in the Greek as was used for Mary, who was Jesus' mother. It really means virgin. So you've got these 10 young women, probably teenagers, getting ready for the bridegroom to come because they've been the ones that are chosen to basically assist the bride, but they got to wait for the bridegroom to come before they do that. And so all of them are ready. They've got their lamps lit in case they need it at night. They need their lamps at night, and they are completely ready for how they are expecting things to be in their head. But that's not what happened. They waited and waited and waited, and the bridegroom didn't come. And finally, their lamps are lit, and some of them were extra prepared and brought extra oil with them just in case they needed it. But a lot of them thought, well, why prepare for something out of the ordinary? The bridegroom just needs to come on time. But he didn't. He came at midnight. And so you've got half the bridegrooms, or half of the bridesmaids. I knew I was going somewhere wrong with that. But anyway, you've got half the bridesmaids just totally ready for the unexpected. And then you've got the other half that didn't prepare at all for the unexpected. And so the ones that weren't prepared said, well, give us your oil. And they're like, why should we give you our oil? Because we're going to need it. But the whole message is about being prepared for the unexpected. So if the question is, how should we be prepared? And of course, the disciples must be asking that question, be prepared for what? What is it that we need to be prepared for? Well, as I was looking at today's parable, realizing there's a group of 3 parables at the very end of Matthew, right before Jesus is arrested and crucified. I thought, what's leading up to that? How can we answer that question based on the context? And first of all, we need to look at what all of Matthew is about. And the theologian and biblical scholar Warren Carter basically says when you read the book of Matthew, you have to look at it in with the understanding that Jesus is constantly looking at the Roman Empire and its way of being in the world and what it's all about, and contrasting it with a brand new, absolutely different way of being called the Empire of Heaven. In almost every English translation, it's called the Kingdom of Heaven. But in the Greek, the word empire is the same word used for the Roman Empire. And so Matthew is saying, look, Jesus is talking about the way things are in the world and saying there's an altogether different way of being in the world. And so Matthew Carter talks about what life was like in the empire. And he basically says there's a relatively few people, a very small percentage, who own most of the wealth, have access to health care, the greatest health care that was available in their day, the people who had the power and the control, the people who made the decisions, and the great masses of people just had to live with whatever happened. Most of them suffered daily from pain, from illness, from injury, and there was not much they could do about it. That's just the way things were in the empire. Most of them were so poor and constantly suffering. And Jesus came along and started changing the way people could be together in community. In other words, let's share. Let's have even the poor people have enough so that they're not suffering, so that they have enough to eat, have enough to drink. And furthermore, Jesus went around healing people constantly. And when we talk about healthcare, I want you to think about this. And next time you read through the Gospels, think about all the people Jesus encountered who were sick or injured and how he healed every single one of them, rich or poor, male or female, people in the center of power and people way out on the margins that other people wouldn't even recognize. Jesus was bringing in a whole new, different way of being in community and in the world. And if you look through the Gospel of Matthew, Warren Carter says, and I agree with him, that's what it's all about. How can we be a people of compassion and a people of justice? And the Old Testament lesson that Grace Eleanor read for us this morning from Amos is the one that must have been on Jesus' mind and people must have thought of as they were hearing Jesus' words, because it was a very popular verse. Let justice roll down like water and righteousness like an everlasting stream. This is what Jesus was talking about in his entire ministry, in all of his teaching and all that he was. He demonstrated it. He didn't just talk about it. And then, right before today's gospel lesson, there's another section of a few chapters of Scripture where Jesus is having a conversation with the people who were in power in the temple. Now, the temple was where the scribes and Pharisees spent most of their time. It was where they went to be holy and be together and away from the dirt and filth of the regular people. And every once in a while, they'd come out and bless them with pronouncements and things like that. But Jesus was having this conversation with them, and it wasn't pretty at all. In fact, he ends the conversation by saying, "You snakes, you brood of vipers." I mean, how much more negative could Jesus be in terms of calling out what he saw? And basically, he was telling the people, do what the Pharisees say, but not what they do, because they're hypocrites and they don't practice what they preach. And then he went on to say, they come to church or to the temple and they bring these gifts and show off how much they tithe and how much money they're able to give in front of all the poor people. And yet, they don't show justice and compassion towards others. So when Jesus is telling people, get ready and get prepared, he's basically saying, get ready and get prepared for an altogether new way of being, a way of compassion, a way of justice. And the other thing that's happening in these several chapters leading up to today's verses that we read, Jesus is not only talking about individual Pharisees, he's talking about the whole structure. And basically, he talks about the temple itself, which is the symbol of power. And all the people at the time know that the temple isn't just church where you go and get close to God. That's where the people hung out that colluded with the Roman Empire to stay in power. And all the masses just kept shaking their heads going, there's nothing we can do about this. And so Jesus basically tells his disciples, this entire temple is going to be destroyed. In other words, get ready. Things are really going to change. Not just little things in your life, but major changes politically and culturally. Get ready to show up with all the things that I've been talking about. Compassion, caring for people, not just some, but for all people. Justice. And so, the disciples are listening to Jesus and thinking, wow, he's talking about something really big here. It's not just the Roman Empire is going to somehow, with all of its structures, go away, but something's going to replace it. And that's when Jesus basically says, it's this new empire that I'm talking about that's not like any other empire you've ever seen or heard of. The empire of heaven is an empire of compassion for all people and justice, literally, for all. Now, as I was rereading a good part of Matthew, and especially the section right before and right after today's passage that Grace Eleanor read for us, I was thinking how appropriate it is for us for two reasons. To be thinking about preparing for something new, something big. First of all, I think any of us that have turned on the news at all over the last week, month, year, or whatever, or read a newspaper, or listened to NPR, we know that something cultural and political is happening among us and changing, and it's big. And I think someday we'll be able to look back in retrospect and be able to kind of figure it all out, but just like things were happening in Jesus' lifetime in the few centuries that we're following, where radical shifts were happening with government and ways of being together, radical shifts are happening in our government. And it seems like as I watch the pendulum go back and forth in the scriptures, where certain times people just do all the wrong things, it seems like, and then justice and compassion are over here and the pendulum swings back. It seems to me like there's a lot of pendulum swinging these days, where it doesn't seem like there's a lot of justice and compassion for certain people today as we're looking at what's going on. And I'm not just talking about our government, but as you look at some of the great issues we're dealing with worldwide, like immigration, like refugees who are desperate for someone, anyone to help them, the pendulum swings both ways, and we're in the midst of that pendulum swinging a lot, and there's a lot of crazy talk out there. People trying to figure out, well, who's on my side? And if you're going to be on my side, or if you're not going to be on my side, then there's nothing we have in common. You're the enemy. And as I read the Gospels, I hear Jesus listening to people, even the people that nobody else was listening to, even the people that may have been hard to listen to. And I hear Jesus saying, compassion for all, justice for all. And so I think the question for us is, what role will we play as we're watching the pendulum swinging right now, today, this year? And I hope the role we play is the role that Jesus was promoting and living and talking about in his entire life, the role of compassion and the role of justice for all people. The other thing that I thought of why this message of preparation is so important for us, it seems like every time this time of year, every year, right before Thanksgiving, we all start thinking about, oh my gosh, is it really almost Thanksgiving and the holiday season again? There is so much to prepare for. So much that we do every year, so many traditions that we have to keep. And we start thinking about the things that might be important, but what I would consider the peripheral things, the things that aren't the most important, like decorating Christmas cookies, decorating the Christmas tree, getting every single Christmas card done before Christmas and writing notes to every single person. All that we do for church, decorating the church even. There's a lot that we do to prepare, but as I was reading today's scripture lesson one last time before coming to church, I thought, I think there's a message in there for us as we're preparing for the holidays to say to ourselves, as we're asking the question, how might we prepare, that we can also say, how can we prepare to show up in this world and in the lives of people who have great needs? How can we be prepared to show up with compassion? Because, if we have all the Christmas cookies decorated perfectly, and we're prepared in that way, but we're not prepared to show up with compassion in the lives of people that are hurting, we've missed the whole point of Christmas altogether. So my invitation to you is, as the holidays approach, Thanksgiving next week, and Christmas, Advent soon to follow with Christmas right after that, spend some time thinking about how you might best prepare in the context of the life and message of Jesus, by showing up in people's lives and in communities and in any other way possible with compassion and with justice. I think that's not only what today's parable is all about. I think that's what all the Gospels are all about. And frankly, that's what, for me anyway, the holiday season is all about. So be prepared in that way, with compassion and with justice. Amen.